Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be looking at chapter 19 of the Mythical Man Month, which is called the Mythical Man Month after 20 years. The author asks why his book has remained relevant even though it was published 20 years prior, and talks about the state of software 30 years prior. He suggests that because software has always been about the people, this book is also about people in terms people and teams making things. Human history, he says, is a drama in which stories stay the same, with the scripts of these stories changing over time. That's why we see ourselves mirrored in Shakespeare, Homer, and the Bible. To the extent that Mythical Man Month is about people and teams, obsolescence should be slow. And I agree. The central argument of this book, according to the author, is that conceptual integrity is the paramount objective for programming products. And what we mean by that is that it should give its users a coherent mental model for using the intended application. This is easy to do with one or two authors, but software tends to be built by large teams, which makes creating mental models difficult, since everyone has his own mental model and his own worldview and framework through which he sees the discipline of software engineering and the world in general. To aid with solving this phenomenon, Brooks advocates strongly for someone to fill the role of an architect, which is someone who would set the program's scope, features, and how everything will interact with each other. The architect is responsible for keeping the needs of the end users throughout the design process so that what is ultimately built is useful and not just an interesting thought exercise. Depending on the footprint of a product, an architect can be a full-time role, but can also be combined with a team lead if the project is small. Conversely, if the product is truly massive, it isn't realistic to have a single person as the architect. But regardless of product size, it's important that someone takes this role on explicitly so that conceptual integrity, which is the central component of product quality, can be ingrained explicitly from the beginning. For a man who so staunchly defended his assertions in previous chapters, the author does show some instances where the original Mythical Man Month has not aged well, and how his mind has changed on some things in the meantime. For example, in Chapter 7, we talked about information hiding. The original point was that everyone should know everything about the whole project all the time. This increased transparency and accountability across the team. This view, Brooks says, is no longer the best way, or he no longer finds this to be the best way to go, but rather different domains of software should be privately owned by individuals or teams, and the software should be built with public interfaces that other individuals and teams can interact with through APIs or inheritance if you're doing object-oriented programming, and so on. But with that being said, the most famous assertion of the original book, that adding more engineers to an already late project makes it later, has continued to be proven true as bodies of evidence are gathered. In a similar vein, Barry Boehm notes that almost no projects can be completed in under 3/4 of their scheduled time, regardless of how many people are added to a project. This being the case, it's worth ramping up teams in an incremental and intentional manner rather than a reactive one, so that overall productivity increases with the addition of new members, rather than the team potentially being thrown into chaos or exacerbating existing problems. Next, Brooks points out that people are ultimately much more important to the success of a project more than tools. And if that sounds familiar from the first book series, you'd be correct. Peopleware by Tom DeMarco and Timothy Lister gets a shout out here, and Brooks highly recommends that book to his readers as well. Accordingly, I'll recommend my own summary series of that book if you haven't listened to it already. I happen to think that these two books go very well together. It is not an accident that they are the ones of the universe of programming related books that are out there. It's not an accident that I chose to do these two as book summary series for YouTube. But I digress. It's like fun to see that, Fred Brooks had that call out here as well. But anyways, the biggest surprise between the first edition and this edition, the author says, the biggest surprise for him is the proliferation of computers everywhere. In the past, size and cost constraints made it impossible for individuals to have their own computing devices. But now, computational power is so small and cheap that nearly everyone has access to it and more of it than they could possibly fully utilize. This access has, in turn, allowed people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to innovate as much to do so now and reach the rest of the planet potentially quickly and easily. The other big surprise from the elapsed time between the original and the 20th anniversary editions is the proliferation of highly specialized, or what he calls shrink-wrapped software. We talked about this in a recent chapter, but the impact is so vast that it's worth mentioning again. Now that hyper-specialized programs exist for everything, we can take the best of what's out there to combine for our own programming systems and focus solely on augmenting the thing that makes our own software different than everyone else's. We come to the end of the chapter and the book, but the author has one more summary point to share, which is that he says this: the tar pit of software engineering will continue to be sticky for a long time to come. One can expect the human race to continue attempting systems just within or just beyond our reach, and software systems are perhaps the most intricate of man's handiworks. We've made it to the top of the mountain for the book and for the video series. You may have watched all these videos in a couple sittings, or maybe all in one shot if I was that interesting. But the truth be told, I've been writing the scripts for this video, for the series, for about a year, and actually maybe even a little bit more. And of course published the first 10 videos about 5 or 6 months ago. So this has been quite a journey for me, and I'm grateful to you for coming along for the ride. I've learned a lot, thought about a lot of things, and I hope the same is true for you as well. So with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this series and found it thought-provoking, and I'll see you all in the next one.